I was first introduced to the word propaganda when I was around 3 or 4 years old and heard Green Day's American Idiot. I didn't know what it meant until I was around 10, but even then, I'm not entirely sure I grasped the meaning. I associated it with politics and political agendas, and 10-year-old me was a staunch apolitical figure. As I grew older and more informed, my political stance changed, and so did my understanding of propaganda. A piece of literature that helped shape my understanding of propaganda was George Orwell's Animal Farm, which I read when I was roughly 15 years old, long before I was a far-left icon. All human beings are equal, but some human beings are more equal than others. I'm going to show off my literature credentials here a bit. George Orwell's Animal Farm is a novella about barn animals who grow tired of their exploitation and become their own leaders. However, one of them is a totalitarian. There is an abuse of power that exchanges hands from the farmer to Napoleon the pig. Animal Farm works as well as it does because it employs Squealer, a propaganda machine that spews bullshit as real news, which some of the farm animals believe as actual truth. The book itself is an allegory for the Russian Revolution, with Napoleon being Stalin, Snowball being Trotsky, and Squealer being the Pravda, the Russian newspaper. Animal Farm is an example of how injustice is often carried out in plain sight but disguised as something necessary. The pigs, a la Team Napoleon, twist facts repeatedly, ranging from changing slogans, practices, behavior, and decrying it's always been that way when they start wearing clothes and walking on 2 feet, essentially becoming humans. They exploit the farm animals who remain loyal throughout the end and are only concerned with getting power, maintaining power, and oppressing those that they see as beneath them. The idea of Animal Farm is that the animals still believe in Napoleon despite all the inconvenience he's causing them, because believing otherwise would mean something so utterly beyond acceptable and disturbing. They're also conditioned and told to believe these lies. Death and other violence, other casualties are excused because these actions have been for the greater good. All this is to say, there is a genocide happening in Palestine. There are innocent civilians, including children and infants, who are being bombed, hospitals with sick patients and doctors, residences, museums, and just about everything that you can think of is being demolished and destroyed in the name of self-defense. There's propaganda akin to Squealer that tries to promote the narrative that Israelis are native to the land instead of settler colonizers, and that literal babies deserve to die because they are terrorists. While there are a lot of discussions to be had about said genocide, I'm going to center this video on how propaganda plays a role in shaping public opinion. To understand Israeli propaganda, we need to evaluate how Israel evolved to be a nation-state. Oftentimes, when people try to comment about the history of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, they are silenced and told that they don't understand the nature or history of these regions. It's only after the incessant bombing and massacres committed by Israel, which they labeled as self-defense, that a lot of us looked into the actual history of the land. And it's not a good look for Israel, to say the least, which is why they needed to use propaganda and spin the narrative to be in their favor. When one looks into the conflict between Israel and Palestine, one has often said that the history is far too complex and a solution is impossible and extremely difficult. The latter statement I agree with. With regard to the complexity of the situation, research makes it clear that Israel has displaced the Palestinian population by illegal occupation. I, like many, had this misconception that Israelis were Middle Eastern and native to the land. I have since learned that Israelis are European Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, who were granted the land of Jerusalem by Europe, and migrated there and since colonized and occupied the surrounding areas by poisoning the wells and making living conditions unbearable for the locals. Additionally, Israel obtained the support of superpowers like America and the USSR, United Kingdom, and Europe due to it being a white nation and colonial power amidst a largely brown Arab population. And therefore, they were more favorable and palatable to a largely Eurocentric, racist society. Palestinians, due to their race, religion, and class, are dehumanized, and violence against them is not considered violence, but rather encouraged, because they're all Hamas, they're all terrorists, they're all human shields, not individuals suffering from atrocities committed by a powerful regime with weapons, bombs, and infantry provided by other countries. I am not a historian, and I'm not claiming to or do not intend to lecture you on the deep history of the conflict. If that's what you want, you're watching the wrong video. I have linked videos that do a historical deep dive in my description. But I would like to say that I do understand the historical context. Many of us do, and it is a reductive, condescending statement to say that we do not. I do understand that Jerusalem is a holy land to the Jewish folk. Okay, let's have a discussion. If my ancestors lived in this home 200 centuries ago, and this was a very special home for my community, but they were forced to migrate due to war, famine, weather conditions, or because of ruling powers, dominant powers. And a few years later, another family moves into that home. They continue living there for a few centuries, and then I go back and I say, hey, that's my house, and my ancestors lived there. So either you move out, or I will literally massacre you and your family and your community. Would you consider that a complex situation for which you definitely need historical context? Because even if I or other individuals speaking out about this did not understand the historical context does not excuse the genocide of innocent civilians. No context excuses a genocide of civilians. It is this fear of being called out for speaking out of turn or not fully understanding the situation that has caused people to twist and turn words so as to not implicate anybody. We see the media in supposed democratic nations mincing words, not doing proper journalism, and reporting whilst funding the genocide. How dystopian is it to read headlines like, "Hundreds dead in blast in Gaza hospital"? I mentioned George Orwell's Animal Farm in the beginning of my video. Now, I'd like to talk about his novel 1984. I know this conversation has been done to death, especially by people who have not read or understood the novel. But I'd like to bring your attention to doublethink, a concept that the totally fictional and not at all based in reality country of, well, more like totalitarian state of Oceania employs as propaganda to control its civilians. Israel uses doublethink to control the public perception of their heinous acts. They frame their country as this oppressed nation that's plagued by terrorist attacks. They want to be seen as this wounded puppy that's gathered the courage to fight back and defend themselves despite going through so much. They also frame themselves as this thriving cultural capital that's one of the world's happiest countries and a wonderful place to live, visit, tour, etc. They cannot pick one narrative. They need both these things to be true for you to be on their side. Coming back to these headlines, which are finger-wagging genocide, because make no mistake, that is what they are doing. And this will go down in history as a failure of the institution of free press. No press is free press if it exists in a capitalist system. They all seek to make this a neutral and centrist take. Oh, a blast happened in a hospital. Wow, can you believe that? The hospital was actually a suicide bomber? The building killed itself by deciding to explode? Oh, what's that? Israel decided to airstrike the hospital? That does make more sense. But wait, isn't airstriking a hospital bad? Because you are not only killing civilians, but also civilians who are unwell and seeking treatment? Isn't this an unforgivable act of violence and cruelty as opposed to self-defense? Oh, they thought Hamas were hiding in underground tunnels and bunkers. Guys, so this was self-defense and not actually war crimes that violate human rights. Israel is deeply regretful of the mistake they made, which is why they make the same mistakes again and again and again and again and again and again and again. What is propaganda if not labeling the slaughter of over 40,000 Palestinians as casualties of self-defense? Which, FYI, it definitely is not. And even if it was, how the fuck do you excuse the slaughter of 40,000 civilians? A large portion of them children, pregnant women, geriatric individuals, or people with health conditions and impairments. Joe Biden, President of the United States of Genocide and War Crimes, gave a press conference where he said that he has not seen any proof of war crimes in Israel. Make no mistake that Biden is complicit in aiding and abetting the genocide of the Palestinians. He has been funding the genocide and supplying the weapons that seek to vanquish Palestinian lives. These words and statements are aiming to distract you from the fact that these lives have been lost, lives have been displaced and ruined because of his decisions. He cannot find proof of war crimes? Joe, log into any social media, fuckface. You will see members of the IDF filming themselves doing war crimes, openly engaging in genocide, violence, and other unforgivable acts. You will honestly be overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of these war criminals, how they justify the brutal murder of literal babies. But of course, all of this predicates on you having empathy, which you very much lack, because you're posting mental health is health while funding the bombing of hospitals, educational institutions, and an entire civilization, forcing the population to live in unsanitary conditions. Women who are menstruating are being forced to use pieces of the tents due to lack of access to pads and tampons, lack of access to medications such as insulin, etc. is killing patients. Palestinian women are being forced to give birth without painkillers, epidurals, doctors, doulas, or midwives, leading to adverse health conditions, not being able to get C-sections or cesareans when they need it, impacting the lives of both the mother and the child, not to mention worsening physical and mental health conditions as a result of their impossible situation. But sure, wouldn't it be nice to ignore all of these adverse, avoidable health crises that you have created and tweet something that you clearly don't believe in to please the masses while sitting in the wealth, splendor, and comfort of your own home, Joseph? Mental health is health? Fuck right off, you deplorable piece of shit. Your legacy will always be the war crimes and genocide you actively participated in, along with Israel, Netanyahu, and other Western nations. Your propaganda machine is barely favorable to you now, but mark my words, it will not stand the test of time. As for the state of Israel itself, please do not believe anything Israel says. Every word of it is coded in the most vile, hateful, despicable propaganda, be it their newspaper, the Times of Israel, their SNL knockoff, or their celebrities. If there is one Israeli source you can trust, it is the members of the IDF openly broadcasting their genocidal behavior and war crimes. As for my username at Genocide Enthusiast, I wanted to say that I was going for something nihilistic and ironic, more like moronic, because I thought it was beyond edgy, because surely no one would be enthusiastic about genocide, and boy was I wrong about that. So I have changed my username to something in the same nihilistic, ironic, moronic sense, to something more palatable. I am keeping the @genocide enthusiast because I don't want the IDF to occupy another thing formerly owned by a brown person. The struggle of Palestinian liberation has been long, and it is still ongoing, but it is my sincere hope that I get to see a free Palestine in my lifetime.